All 80 people on board that flight from Minneapolis to Toronto yesterday afternoon survived. You've probably seen the images or the video of that plane flipped upside down on its back while it was coming in for a landing at Pearson International Airport. 21 people in total were treated at hospitals, and as of now, the latest information that we just got a couple of minutes ago, 2 people still in the hospital. And we're also starting to hear, more from these passengers who were on board at the time. Just a couple of quotes here. All of a sudden, everything just kind of went sideways. And then the next thing I know is kind of a blink and I'm upside down, still strapped in. Another said when he took off his seatbelt, he crashed onto the ceiling, which had become the floor. He started to smell gas, saw aviation fuel streaming down the cabin windows, and he knew he needed to get out. Even sending a text message to his wife back in Minnesota, I love you and I love our kids. A lot more to talk about here. Let's take a listen to, I believe we had a news conference here just within the last half hour or so from Toronto, bringing us up to speed on some of these things, and then I'm going to work on trying to get this interview for us as well. So let's take that clip. This is Toronto just about a half hour ago, giving us the very latest on the plane crash.
Last night, 7 members of the Transportation Safety Board of Canada arrived at Toronto Pearson to begin the investigation. 13 more of those investigators arrived today. Members of the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration are also here on site, participating in the investigation. As it is a Mitsubishi aircraft, Mitsubishi will be here on site as well, and Delta Airlines has sent their GO team who are already here on site. So what does this all mean for operations at Toronto Pearson today and in the days ahead? Our Emergency Operations Center does remain open, though operations on the runways resumed at 5 p.m. Eastern Time yesterday. We have been in recovery mode since resuming flights at 5 p.m. yesterday, catching up on delayed flights, and that continues into today as well. We do expect that the investigators on site will be reviewing the aircraft on its current configuration on the runway for the next 48 hours. And we are looking to get to support that investigation and the removal of that aircraft off the runway, at which point we can do our inspections and then return that runway into service.
All right, so that's the very latest from Toronto here just within the last half hour or so. Not a lot of new information. Obviously, they are not talking about any of the weather conditions. This is now part of the investigation. Last night, we did hear from an official who did talk about the fact that they said that the runway was clean and that there were no crosswinds at the time. And I think as people take a look at the video from that yesterday afternoon, you can see the winds whipping quite a bit. So I think there are still a lot of questions around that, and that was where most of the questions from the reporters went today, was kind of this trying to clarify that. But again, not saying a word now because it is part of this active investigation. Again, we're hearing from some of the passengers, and we're also hearing from pilots and crew members who have seen these videos. Some of them have heard some of the limited audio transmissions that have been out there. And, all of these folks have had an experience in the air in that type of aircraft, maybe not this type of incident, but they know the protocol, they know what should happen in a case like this. So joining me now is Matthew Buckley, a decorated fighter pilot who also flew commercial planes, like the one that crashed yesterday in Toronto. Thanks so much for joining us, Matthew.
Thanks for having me, Amy. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so when you heard about this yesterday, just early on, what were some of the first thoughts that you had?
Amy, anytime there's an aviation mishap, military or civilian, the first thing I do is grab my cell phone and I look at one of my aviation apps, in this case 4Flight, because I want to check out the weather immediately to see if that was a contributing factor. And obviously the weather yesterday, clear, wasn't clouds or anything like that, but very windy, very gusty conditions, and obviously with drifting and blowing snow, but very, very gusty conditions. So I'm going to take issue with, I don't know who you quoted or whatever official that was. They could not have been more wrong. There was absolutely a significant crosswind. Runway 23 is what they were using, and the winds were coming from 270. That's a 40-degree crosswind component. So whoever was saying that is clearly mistaken. The winds were not straight down the runway. they were about 40 degrees off of this aircraft.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, this is sort of the point of contention today from reporters trying to get that clarification. And in fact, last night when we heard that on the news conference, I think we may have chosen not to even use that because it just, we were seeing with our own eyes something different. We have a chief meteorologist here who's, flown into that airport many, many times. He's Canadian. I mean, he's very familiar with that. And he was telling us the actual conditions on the ground at that time. So yeah, there are a lot of questions still around that and why that was said. You know, as I don't know if you've been able to see more videos of what happened. The one I saw today, which we aren't able to show, we don't have a clearance for that, but it really does show more close up the plane coming in and touching the ground. And then can you describe what's happening there? And as you look at that, what are your thoughts?
Amy, my immediate thoughts were that was an aircraft carrier landing. So I flew the F-18 Hornet for the Navy, and our rate of descent touching down aboard an aircraft carrier is about 800 feet per minute. That's like sitting in your driveway in your car and having a crane take you up to the second story and then dropping you. And the F-18 is designed for landing aboard the carrier. If you see a carrier aircraft up close, the landing gear are pretty beefy. They're meant for this. The last data that I saw for this aircraft was 1,100 feet per minute rate of descent. So it literally looked like a landing aboard an aircraft carrier. And clearly, regional jet landing gear are not stressed for this type of landing. So that was my immediate takeaway. And also, obviously, on an airliner, once you get close to the runway, you pull the nose back a little bit, you reduce the power to do a nice soft landing. They did not flare at all. This was just a constant angle of attack to touchdown.
And so, Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and you can see what immediately happens. A little bit of a right wing down, and they slam onto the runway. The right main landing gear shears off. I mean, that's completely destroyed. That's going to break off the right wing. The only wing that's left is the left wing, and that's still creating lift. So that's why you get the roll. That's why the airplane rolled, is because that left wing was actually still flying, so to speak, and that's why the fuselage ended up rolling.
So what would cause a pilot, or what would cause that situation where you've got that really hard crash type landing? Why did it get to that point? Or what was happening possibly beforehand?
Well, Amy, that's $1 million question. Sadly, 70 to 80% of civilian aviation mishaps are pilot error. In that cockpit, the pilot not flying, once they saw that rate of descent start really picking up, should have added go around power. They should have went to max power immediately to go around and try it again. You have enough fuel. It just makes no sense to try and salvage a landing like that. So unless something crazy comes out of the woodwork here, looking 99.9% chance that this is a pilot error.
Yeah, and oftentimes in speaking with investigators, as we did after the DC midair crash, you learn that it's never just one thing. You know this too. It's usually a combination or a series of events that leads to something like this. So if we have something like that, I guess also we've been talking about the winds. Would that have sort of perpetuated an existing problem, or landing gear, or other things like that?
You nailed it. Whenever we have an aviation mishap, we work backwards from the mishap, and it literally is a chain of events, just like links in a chain. If you pull any one of those links out, the mishap doesn't happen. So we just nailed a couple of them. Very, very gusty winds, crosswind conditions, unlike that official said. They absolutely had a very significant crosswind. Training. So we don't, you don't really get to train to these landings too much. You obviously do in the simulator, right? But out there flying the line in the front of that cockpit, those were kind of varsity conditions yesterday. Extremely windy, gusty, and blowing snow. And then obviously in the cockpit, crew coordination. If I was, it's always easy to Monday morning quarterback, but clearly if I was in the cockpit and we were getting ready to slam into the runway, I would have gobbed on a full throttle of power to try and either cushion that landing or to go around and try it again. But we'll be listening to the cockpit voice recorders to piece through all of that stuff. But clearly should not have happened. And, we have a kind of a glib saying in aviation, any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. Well, this one was a pretty bad landing, and I'm glad a lot of folks walked away.
Okay. So many questions for you. I guess first and foremost, as people look at that and saw that plane flipped up on its back, I think people looked at it and thought, oh my goodness, how's everybody inside? The fact that everyone was able to self-evacuate, I mean, did the plane sort of do what it was supposed to do and break off in the pieces it was supposed to break off, or how did they walk out of there?
Amy, I don't want to scare too many people, but among my aviation sisters and brothers today, we are absolutely stunned that aircraft maintained structural integrity, that the hull was not compromised and scattered into pieces. So God was, or something was clearly looking out for all of those folks. And the cabin crew did a fantastic job, showing it right now with the cabin crew helping people get out. And obviously the crash rescue folks, when that plane initially landed, there was a big fireball. Thankfully, since it was on landing, it wasn't packed full of fuel, right? They weren't taking off, they were landing, so a little less fuel in the airplane. But the crash rescue ladies and gentlemen, they train for this stuff all the time, and they're usually sitting alert at the end of the runway or in a tactical position. So as soon as that plane hit and they saw a fireball, as you can tell, the crash rescue folks were right on there, hosing it down in case there was a reflash or another explosion. But sure, long answer to your short question, kind of stunned that this wasn't worse. It could have been absolutely a lot worse.
And just really quickly, you talk about the cabin crew and the folks inside, and as they were coming out, they appeared calm. We've seen that video now of people getting out. It just seemed very orderly. What is in those moments, if it's 90 seconds or 2 minutes in that cabin, trying to get everybody out, what is happening? What are what's the flight crew trying to do?
Well, the first thing they're doing, and you should listen to these folks, or they're professionals, don't take anything, right? We've seen some of these mishaps where people are grabbing their overhead bags or their backpacks. Get out of the aircraft. There is nothing in that aircraft at this point that is worth your life. So get out. So you can actually hear the cabin crew like, hey, stop filming, or focus on getting out of the airplane. We can always get you more clothes or a new suitcase, but you have got to exit the aircraft. So very professional, and my hat's off to the Endeavor Air crew in the cabin, at least.
One final question for you. People are a little edgy right now. We've had these airplane mishaps, I guess, accidents. I think there have been 4 now in North America in the last 3 weeks, and obviously causes are different. It's maybe landing gear here or whatever, but this is our weather. We've got this weather, and I imagine people who are already anxious about flying, this really will compound that. What would you say to passengers here who are going to be flying?
Amy, it is so much more dangerous driving to and from the airport than flying. Today's aviation is just it's so much safer than quote the old days. So you're okay. These mishaps coming so close together, I get it. Obviously the hair on everybody's neck is going to stand up and get a little bit worried. But if we had spread these out, so to speak, over the year, they would have made a little bit of news stories, and we'd go on our way, sadly. But it's luck of the draw that these are all happening close together. And as you and I talked about, each one of these are links in the chain. Each one of those mishaps that if we pull one out, they're not going to happen again. So thankfully, we'll figure out why all of this is happening, and we're going to avoid it in the future.
All right, Matthew.